Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll go into our first item, our Reclaim Transition Quarterly Report. Susan.
Okay, so this is our third update to the Station Resource Committee, and this is sort of our structure that we've provided in terms of just providing at a glance. We're continuing to do our monthly Reclaim Working Group meetings. Role development on the command and control landing roles is progressing. We had 6 working group meetings this week, so we're quite busy. And we did release the first version of the Reclaim Transition Plan, which we talked about at the last update, but it really is in this particular quarterly update. And then we're still proceeding with reviewing the information for the transition letters, but we're holding off on the final notification to transition any facilities out of Reclaim. So in terms of the Reclaim Working Group meetings that we have monthly, we did not have a meeting in the month of May, but in March the focus was on the Reclaim Transition Plan. In April, we presented some new source review scenarios. So in addition to the traditional concepts for new source review and using, we had talked about using our internal bank, we presented some other possible scenarios that could be facilities using the existing Reclaim 2005 new source review provisions before they transition or as they transition out of Reclaim. So we presented that as just a hypothetical, just to seek some comments and thoughts about that. And then we provided some our initial thoughts on amendments to Rules 2001 and 2002 in regards to some provisions that I'll highlight later in the presentation. And then in June, we went into more depth about the proposed amendments to 2001 and 2002. So we received a number of comment letters. The comment letters have focused on the transition and how we're doing the transition, and issues in regards to CEQA, the socioeconomic analysis, and whether or not we're piecemealing, and should we be preparing a programmatic EIR. And so we provided a response letter in regards to that, and we did prepare a programmatic EIR for the 2016 AQMP. We feel that that covers in terms of that programmatic analysis, and then as we go through each individual rule, we're doing the CEQA analysis for each of those rules if there's any changes. In regards to new source review, we're continuing to progress on our thought process for new source review. Yes, we agree facilities are not going to transition out until we resolve the issues with new source review. And so we have another provision that we're going to propose in Proposed Amendment Rule 2002 that will allow facilities to actually stay in the program for a very limited time while we resolve new source review and other transition issues. And then in regards to the monitoring, reporting, and record keeping requirements, there's a request for more flexibility in regards to the facilities as they transition from a market-based program to command and control. We're going to be looking at where you can provide that flexibility and reducing some of the reporting requirements. In regards to the SIMS requirements, there's probably still going to maintain the continuous emissions monitoring system, even if we did not have a command and control rule. When you look at the landing, the source-specific rules, they have SIMS requirements for equipment of similar sizes. So, but we will look for where we can provide relief to facilities in regards to monitoring, reporting, and record-keeping requirements. So update on rulemaking, we are progressing. We've had some challenges and some bumps in the road. It's not progressing as fast as we would like, but staff is still pushing forward. We had attempted to set hearing on the 1146 series rules. It was delayed. We received comments to reassess the bark limits. Staff is reassessing the bark limits and doing a more detailed, comprehensive look. This caused staff to take an overall pause and to recalibrate all of the different rule groups that are working on the bark analyses to ensure that we're doing it all consistently. And so we kind of did an internal staff development on that, and so I think we're in good shape as we move forward. There's been other landing rules. It's like in the July rule forecast report, you'll see many of the landing rules and other rules that have shifted. part of this shift is there is a ripple effect when we delay a rule, then it kind of pushes, if it's the same rule team, then there's a little bit of a ripple effect there. But also it's to allow us additional time to work with stakeholders. We really want to build consensus. We want a proposal that everybody can live with while still meeting the objectives of our air quality objectives. So the revised schedule, this is a previous slide that I had showed at the past quarterly update, and then this just shows the changes in regards to the shift in some of the rules and the time frame. There's a number of rules that were scheduled for the end of 2018 that we'll be looking at bringing forward in 2019. 1110.2, for example, or I'm sorry, 1134 is a rule that is getting pretty close, but we're going to have CEQA impact, so we need additional time to ensure that we conduct the appropriate CEQA document and the public commenting associated with that. So there is one proposed amendment rule 1135 that was scheduled for November, and we're actually able to push that to October. But this gives you an overview of the schedule for the landing rules.
Just briefly mention what they're for.
Oh, yeah, I think this one. So, in terms of the landing rules, proposed amendment rule 1135 is for electrical generating facilities. We had a working group meeting this week. We're progressing. Rule language will come out next month for rule 1135. 1118.1 is the non-refinery flares. This working group, we had a working group meeting this week also, and we took a pause on this rule. We received a number of comment letters on the proposal that we had, so we revised staff's proposal and concepts, floated it by the working group. We're getting a little more consensus in terms of the direction that we're moving. Proposed amendment rules 1146, 1146.1, 1146.2 are the external combustion boilers, steam generators, and heaters. This is the rule that we had attempted to set hearing, was delayed to go back and redo the BARC analysis, which we're doing a more in-depth BARC analysis for those rules. For proposed amendment rule 1134, this is gas turbines. This rule is really on a similar track to Rule 1135, but we're going to have, we anticipate significant CEQA impact, so we're going to need to do a notice of preparation, initial study, and a full 45-day equivalent to an environmental impact report. Proposed Rule 1109.1, this is the refinery rule. We had the second working group meeting. Although it appears that it's like the working group meetings for this one is behind the other ones, there was a substantial amount of work that was done to prepare a survey for the refineries, and working with the refineries on the elements that would go into the survey, and the refineries are working on that survey. We had a working group meeting yesterday to discuss where we are in the BARC analysis for Rule 1109.1, and this one is, the public hearing will be scheduled in 2019. Dr. Liu at the last quarterly update had asked for us to give a sense of the magnitude of emission reductions. It's really difficult to really pinpoint exactly what we would anticipate, but we tried to bin the rules into three categories of kind of small, medium, and larger reductions. And based on what we're anticipating, looking at the information, the BARC analysis isn't completed, so the exact emission reductions is not known yet. But what we generally are seeing is that we would expect the smaller reductions from the 1146 series rules, 1118.1, which is the non-refinery flares, 1110.2, which is the internal combustion gas and liquid fueled engines, Rule 1135 for electrical generating facilities, and 1147.2, which is a proposed rule for aggregate facilities. In terms of medium reductions, we anticipate for Rule 1134 for gas turbines, 1147, which is the miscellaneous combustion rule that we all love, and 1147.1, which is going to be the metal operations, metal melting facilities. Larger reductions we anticipate will be for the refining rule, proposed Rule 1109.1. So we did highlight this at the last at the last quarterly update, but it really falls in this quarterly update. So we did release the first version of the transition plan. We do anticipate that we will have multiple versions of the transition plan. We have received pretty good feedback from stakeholders with some additional feedback in regards to what they'd like to see in future versions. So this just kind of highlights what some of the other topics that are coming. The first version of the transition plan covered really sort of the key elements that we've discussed to date. We just touched on new source review and permitting, but as we move into the second version, that'll be much of the focus. So wanted to highlight some proposed amendments that we're working on for 2001 and 2002. Rule 2001, we're developing proposed amendments for two elements. One would be a BARC compliance plan. This is really only for those facilities where there is no current or planned landing rule, and it's very unique situations for certain facilities. We're also looking at an opt-out provision for, it's really for those facilities that there is a landing rule, and for some reason we may have overlooked that particular facility, or that facility has had a change in their equipment profile, and that facility is ready to opt out. In Rule 2002, we're adding a provision, and we had good feedback from our working group yesterday in regards to a provision that would allow facilities to remain in reclaim for a very limited amount of time to allow staff to continue working on the issues and to resolve the issues with new source review, permitting, and any other remaining issues. We are not planning on issuing any final notifications, but I think this provides to the regulated community an additional assurance that they can they can use this provision in the event that they're concerned about transitioning out. Ongoing efforts will continue with our monthly meetings, continue with our working group meetings on our rules. We're continuing working with EPA on new source review for the transition. Any comments, questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you could describe some of the issues that we're discussing with respect to new source review.
So probably the most and the largest issue is the availability of offsets or ERCs as they transition out. So the availability of ERCs in the open market is somewhat scarce, and folks that, even if there are ERCs that are available in the open market, people that are holding them are likely to hold on to them for their own future use. And so we're looking at options in terms of what we can do, because as facilities transition out, we want them to be able to modernize their facility, and we don't want to stifle the ability for a facility to grow cleanly. So that's our primary concern. There's other issues in regards to new source review with EPA in regards to how we do the accounting, and so we're working on that also. But the main, probably the main topic and the main issue is the availability of offsets for those facilities as they transition out.
Could you also just touch on the pre and post reclaim and conversion where EPA may have concerns?
So there's been a number of different concerns on the as we transition the facilities out. So there's been questions in regards to facilities as they entered into reclaim. They had ERCs. There were some facilities that were required to convert their ERCs to RTCs. And so one of the questions is, those ERCs that were converted to RTCs, should the facility be able to convert back? Would that be done on a facility basis, or would that be done programmatically? And so that's one of the issues. There's some, there's a lot of differences between reclaim NSR, because it's a cap and trade program, and then command and control, new source review. And there's issues that we're trying to work out with EPA in terms of that crossover. It's like, this is this program, and it was based on an allocation, it was based on actuals. This is a program that's based on PTEs. So we're trying to resolve those different issues.
Okay, another question is 617 required all the refineries to be embarked by 2023.
December 2023.
So are we in line to get that done?
We're working towards that goal, but I think we also trying to be mindful that the refineries have their turnaround schedules. But it's important that we, keep pushing on 1109.1, so they have the certainty of where they need to be, and they know the timing. We've already met with refineries. They're already starting to think about the different projects that they're going to be implementing, but they need to know what that sort of bright line of where they need to hit. So.
Okay. That was all I had, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Any other board member questions?
I don't have a question, but this is Janice Westford. Just want to let you know I had joined, but I don't have any video, so I'm on audio only.
Very good. Thank you for joining us. Any public comment on this item? Not seeing anyone jumping up. Very good. Thank you, Susan. All right, our next item will be the summary of the memorandum agreement between CARB and SCAQMD. And Raphael?
Good morning, Mayor Benoit, committee members. I'm Raphael Reynosa.
Morning.
Senior Enforcement Manager over Refinery, Energy, and Gasoline Dispensing Facilities. I'm providing you an informational update on item number 2, where the district is proposing to enter into a memorandum of agreement with CARB to implement and enforce the greenhouse gas and emission standards applicable to crude oil and natural gas facilities. Essentially, this proposal seeks to get approval for the MOA and grant the executive officer authorization to execute the MOA. In addition, recognize $150,000 in revenue provided by CARB and $125,000 every year thereafter. For background information, the California Energy Commission and CARB estimate that oil and gas systems are responsible for approximately 15% of methane emissions generated in the state of California. CARB's goal is to reduce methane emissions by 40% by 2030. As such, CARB has implemented a series of regulations seeking to control methane emissions. The statutes there are there for a reference. The agreement will build upon processes such as rulemaking, permitting, and enforcement programs already in place with the district. Some specific rules that are already applicable to the oil and gas industry are 1148.1, 1148.2, and 1173, all which seek to reduce fugitive emissions from oil and gas operations. Rule 1173 most closely mimics the CARB standard in that both the CARB standard and 1173 are leak detection and repair programs. We have currently about 365 permitted oil and gas facilities within our basin. And once the MOA is approved and as we move forward, we'll continue our primary inspection program at the 365 facilities. We'll add in the new CARB requirements. We expect in current ongoing conversations with CARB and as the list develops, we estimate that the population of the facilities will probably be less than half of our inventory, less than half of the 365. We plan to utilize existing staffing and resources. And upon receipt of the $150,000 during the first implementation year, we plan to develop a program that where the additional work provided by the CARB standard will not exceed the $150,000 provided by CARB. And that ends my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Mr. Chair,
Please go ahead.
I just need to announce that I have no financial interest in this issue and no action is required actually, but I need to identify for the record that I'm a member of the California Air Resources Board.
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Lease, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to know, since I'm still relatively new here, what contributions has CARB made toward this effort already? Because when I look at the amount, 150,000, is that a part of what has already been made available, or is that just the start? And how far will they continue to provide funding for these efforts?
This is a relatively new standard that was adopted as of October 1st, 2017. And since that time period, CARB has been active. They sent out a survey to all facilities that may be subject to the regulation. And they're in the process of receiving those surveys back. They're developing their inventory. And upon execution of the MOA, then we'll receive the initial 150,000. And so this is just the initial year, implementation year.
What does 150,000 buy us? What does that mean in terms of staffing or whatever?
In terms of staffing, it's about equivalent to one full-time equivalent. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to add one staff member immediately, but we will subsume those funds and we'll spread them across the board to pay for administrative costs, reporting our compliance statistics back to CARB. It may supplement, let's say, for example, equipment that may be necessary to implement the standard, such as a FLIR camera and/or portable analyzers, and so on and so forth.
So we anticipate this fund will grow over the next course of whatever, 5 or 10 years. Yes.
Currently, the inventory, our complete inventory, is only 365 facilities, and so there are specific exemptions provided in the CARB standard, where we don't believe that the entire 365 facility inventory will be subject to the standard, and so we don't expect it to grow very much, but the monies will basically augment what we're already doing.
And is it possible to get a list of the 365 in LA County?
Yes, we can provide that. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Very good. Any other board member questions? Yeah. Any public comment? All right, Raphael, we had this down for 15 minutes. You did very well. All right, item number 3, the update on Assembly Bill 617. Mr. Gosh.
This is Philip Fine.
But
I'll take care
I'm just going by what I got on here.
I know. I'm sorry about that. I do want to recognize Dr. Ghosh and her staff, Pedro Piqueras and Daniela Oriana, for bringing this to where we are today. It's a very challenging program, very challenging deadlines in this AB 617 program, and essentially we're being asked to choose certain communities over other communities, which is a very difficult position to be in. But they've done outstanding work in the outreach and putting this together. So we're going to provide an update today of where we are in this process. So as you know, a little bit of background, AB 617 has a lot of different components to it. The biggest ones, I think, for the districts to implement explicitly by statute are the community air monitoring, as well as developing community emission reduction plans in these communities. And obviously, the first thing you have to do in order to get started on those types of activities are identify the communities where you're going to be going to. And so we came to Stationary Source Committee a couple months ago talking about community identification. So we came up with a list of over 50 different communities that are being considered for this program. And we're here today to talk about how we prioritize those communities, as well as making recommendations to CARB for where we might be going in the first year. I will say that this is preliminary. This is intended to go before the board in July. We still have 2 more community meetings next week. So this is still subject to adjustment and change. AB 617 is an ongoing program, so it's not just a 1 year. It's going to come back every year, where we're going to be reassessing the communities and those prioritizations. We have heard through this process over the past several months that CARB is likely to select anywhere between 5 and 10 communities in the first year statewide. Given that we have about 40% of the population and maybe 50% of the disadvantaged disadvantaged communities in terms of census tracts, if they did choose 10, we would think that we might get 3 or 4 of those. But as we all have talked about, it's a significant workload to do these types of activities. The activities in these communities could include community air monitoring and or community emission reduction plans. There may be some communities that get one or the other. Many will get both. The ultimate goal, of course, is to clean the air through those emission reduction plans and using monitoring to identify problems and track progress. Just to lay out the process, as I mentioned before, we had that preliminary list at Stationary Source back a couple months ago, and we had provided that list to CARB. They requested that preliminary list. That was sent on to CARB on April. We're coming today with our recommendations, and we'll be going to the governing board in July with a board letter and a draft report of which communities we are recommending in the first year and how we came up with that and sending that to CARB. They have a deadline of July 31st to get that to them, and since the timelines are tight, we will likely be putting some final touches on that report even after July. No major changes, just some technical information. And then CARB is scheduled to consider this statewide strategy, identifying those communities in late September to hit their statutory deadline of October 1st of this year. We've done extensive outreach. This shows that we've had so far 8 community meetings with 2 additional meetings still to occur. Those are meetings that we held. We had a technical workshop here at the district to go into more of the technical details of the criteria and the scoring. But we have also talked about this program to anyone who would invite us to talk about it. So other entities, community meetings, other government agencies, workshops, advisory groups, COGS. We've been out talking about this program. We have again, and done some outreach, even though it's not listed here as a specific community meeting in the Coachella Valley as well. You can see how intensive the outreach has been over the last several months in the chart to the right. We have received very good input at these community meetings. We've received input on the types of air pollution sources that people are concerned about, other types of issues that they're concerned about when it comes to air quality, and then some population factors we should be considering when we're prioritizing communities. So many of these are issues we've all heard about before, whether it's sources from diesel and freeways, or facilities that attract those mobile sources, oil production and processing, whether it's extraction or refining, and then kind of the waste facilities like scrap yards and landfills. We've also heard a lot about we should be prioritizing areas that have a lot of schools near industrial areas where there's concentrations of industries, and the desire to have more green spaces in a lot of these communities that helps, not just beautify the communities, but separate some of the industry from the housing. Of course, we don't have land use authority, so this is something we would have to work with those local authorities to help implement if that was what the communities were looking for. And then population factors, population density, income, race, all these other factors, that a lot of which are either included or included by surrogate within CALENVIROSCREEN, which I'll talk about as one of our factors. So the 3 main tools that we're using to try to look at the different communities and look at the metrics, we have our own multiple air toxic exposure study. Our most recent final data is from 2012 and 2013. We're in the middle of MATES 5 right now. We won't have that data in time for this first year. We're also looking at CALENVIROSCREEN because that includes not just air pollution factors, but a lot of those socioeconomic factors. They're listed here. I won't go into details now. And based on input, we developed our own factor, looking at school and daycare proximity to freeways and industrial zones. And we were able to do that with our some GIS tools that we've developed. And that is also a factor that has gone into our first shot at this determination. Just to remind everyone, this is the multiple air toxic exposure study, MATES 4. So obviously it's driven by cancer risk, driven by diesel particulate matter, and you can see how the risk follows the goods movement corridors and the freeways. CALENVIROSCREEN, there's a lot of overlap and correlation with this in the last map, and this is looking at all those other socioeconomic factors combined with pollution factors, some of which are air quality factors, but some of which are other types of environmental factors such as water, hazardous waste. And then this is our metric that we developed, looking at schools near industrial areas and freeways. And the map actually looks a little bit different, but it gives us a different picture of where some of these problems might be. So this is something else that we've factored in. So we have all these metrics, and so what do we do with that? We can rank all these communities that we identified, the 55 communities, by each metric. But we wanted a systematic approach and a methodology to try to show how we can arrive at kind of where we have the highest priority communities and tier them as we go forward. So the first thing is we identified all those communities. We talked about that before, and then we wanted to have different considerations by air basin, and then we applied different screening criteria in each step with additional factors to come up with our recommendation. I'm going to go into more detail here as we go forward. So step one, as we had talked about before, was all-inclusive. It was any community that was in the top 25% of our mates for air toxics cancer risk, or in the top 25% statewide of CALENVIROSCREEN, or there was a community nomination, regardless of where that came from, or it came up in our school density factor. So you just needed to have one of these factors to be in that initial over 50 community list that was provided to CARB. And then this is that map of those communities. You've seen it in some of the previous slides with no ranking, just where they are. I will mention that it's a kind of more of an art than a science of where you want to draw the boundaries of these communities, and we fully expect that as we go forward in the program and we hear from the communities and the community groups that some of these boundaries may shift a bit, they could combine, they could get larger, they could get smaller. So there's nothing magic about how we developed these boundaries, but we did need something to go on, at least initially. And as we move forward and we hear from the community about how they self-identify, then we could probably refine this as we go forward. So I mentioned step two, where there are different data sources and different types of air quality factors in Coachella Valley versus South Coast. So for Coachella Valley, on the bottom of this slide, there are a couple communities out there that will be considered kind of separately. There's some monitoring efforts that are getting started out there through those community grants that CARB gave out. So we'll be getting some data on that, and we'll be looking at that not necessarily for year one, but in the coming year 2 to year 6, depending on the resources we have and depending on the data that's coming out of those monitoring collaborations that are going on. But for the basin, we wanted to look at really the most disadvantaged communities. So we looked at not just the top 25%, but like the top 5% of CALENVIROSCREEN for the high priority communities. But we also wanted to include another factor there, because you can score very highly in CALENVIROSCREEN without having necessarily an air quality factor that's scored high. So we wanted to make sure that there was at least some air quality component, because our goal is to address air quality issues. We need air quality issues to address. So we also included this metric that you're at least in the top half of mates as well. But this screening was really to focus in and CALENVIROSCREEN the most disadvantaged communities in our basin. So of the 55, about 33 of the communities met both of those criteria. But then, those are kind of our high priority communities, but then we have to evaluate additional factors. So we look back at our community, we screened in for this, but we wanted to look back at the scoring on the schools near industrial areas, so we brought that back in. We looked at past air monitoring studies or current air monitoring studies that would help give us that information to help prioritize. We looked at not just monitoring, but past and current community plans or programs to reduce emissions. We have our Clean Communities Plan, we have the work we've done in Paramount, there's other types of efforts that have gone on in the past. And then we also look for those self-nominations and more broad-based community support, so as we go into the community, we have those partners to work with. So with that, we came up with this criteria where we looked at these different factors, and we looked at self-nominations, we looked at past monitoring or planning, and then we looked at that school proximity. And then if you had 2 or more of these factors or had a self-nomination, we put you, it was a higher priority. The other ones we looked at are more things that we might address not in the initial years of the program, but in the years after the initial set. So this leaves us with about 17 communities in the first, that are the highest priority. And then, so now we have 17 communities, but we can't do all 17 communities in the first year. So we need to look at other factors as well to see where we might want to go first and how we do this implementation schedule for these 17 communities, which could take anywhere from 5 to 6 to 8 years, depending on the resources that we get. So given those short time frames, and given this is the first year, what we came up with is recommending for this first year communities that kind of have a head start, that we're not starting from scratch, where there's existing or past air monitoring, existing or past community plans, so we can pave the way for rapid implementation so we can show these successes. We also wanted to have some geographic diversity and diverse air pollution issues. We didn't want to have all the communities looking at one particular type of mobile source, because these communities we do in the first phase of the program are going to serve as models as it expands. So we want to have a different set of issues to address, so those, when we do have success, we can replicate those in other similar communities. And of course, resources. We are working with the legislature to provide additional resources in order to do this work. It has not been decided upon yet, so how much we can bite off in the first year, or even second year or third year, is really going to be dependent on the resources that are brought to bear, because this is not inexpensive work when it comes to monitoring and staff time. So with that, and given some of the past work, we've made these recommendations for 4 communities for the first year, but it's 4 communities as funding resources allow. I had mentioned that CARB is anticipating up to 10 communities in the first year, and just based on population alone, we would think that we would get 4 of that. So when we're in the legislature, we were asking for a budget that would cover 4 communities. If we get less than what we asked for, we may have to delay some of this implementation to a subsequent year. But the 4 communities are the port area, the Wilmington, West Long Beach, Carson area, and that really builds upon the current MATES 5 monitoring effort. We have a full station there doing toxics. We have some sensor deployments going on, and I think that can roll right into AB 617 quite nicely, and so we do have a head start. If you remember, we've had the Clean Communities Plan pilots that were done several years ago, and we believe those were successful, but there's still more good work to be done in those communities, especially with the additional resources that this program promises. So we want to build upon those past efforts and the partnerships we developed there in Boyle Heights and East LA, as well as out in San Bernardino in the community around the rail yard and north of the BNSF rail yard, which we've worked with before. Again, another little bit of a head start for the first year. And then an area that scored very high on a lot of our metrics was this area in Southgate, Huntington Park, as well as some unincorporated areas that have a lot of industrial land use, very close to residential areas, as well as they have a full MATES 5 station going right now, which gives us a basis for some additional monitoring. So this is staff's preliminary recommendations for year 1. We still have additional community outreach over the next couple weeks, and obviously we'll take input from the committee and the board about this approach. Just real quickly, these 4 communities, I think everyone's familiar with them here, but again, they score fairly high. This area was the top in terms of MATES 4 data. It was 98.8th percentile in CALENVIROSCREEN, and we had a lot of nominations, and obviously there's a lot of sources in that area. When we look at East LA, again, this is a lot of mobile sources, the freeways, but there is some industry in that area. Again, 99.4th percentile in MATES, 99.9th percentile in CALENVIROSCREEN, so ranked very highly. And again, we did receive some nominations from those community members. In San Bernardino, again, there's very highly ranked in CALENVIROSCREEN, 99.7th percentile, not as high in MATES 4 because of a lot of the the toxics are more regional out there, but they do have the rail yard that we would like to address the diesel PM emissions there, and the socioeconomic status of this area is a significant factor. And again, we did receive nominations from CCAEJ and other elected officials for this area. And then finally, the Southgate area, again, they have the Alameda corridor, major industrial areas very close to homes and schools. LA County Public Health has done some work in the Florence Firestone area we could build upon. They rank very highly in MATES and CALENVIROSCREEN. They had the highest category for school proximity, and we did receive a nomination. So we think this will be a good start. But again, we have a little bit less of a head start in this community than the other ones, but so this is, as we say, as funding resources allow. I do want to mention Paramount and Compton. We would obviously continue our efforts there, and a lot of those efforts are very similar to the efforts that might occur in an AB 617 deployment in terms of monitoring as well as community emission reduction plans, and we will continue that work. We're a little bit further along than we need to start up fresh for AB 617. But there's still some issues in that community, even though we've kind of addressed some of the immediate issues. So we'll consider those communities as we move forward in the program in years 2 through 5 or 2 through 6, if there are some lingering issues that require additional attention. So this is the other set of communities that are in the kind of this either year 2 through 5 or 2 through 6, or depending on the funding, it could be even longer. But this is kind of the next tier that we would like to address in kind of this first tranche of communities, and they're listed here. Again, there's still some public input being taken. We do want to make sure that all the communities, we can justify those choices based on the metrics that we have. But if there's anything we've missed, we're definitely interested in taking that input or additional data we may have missed. So I won't go into details there. And this is the other ones that are left, that they do rank highly, but they're going to have to be addressed kind of in the out years of the program. Again, we will relook at this every year, see if there's new data, look at MATES 5 data. There could be some reshuffling going forward. So next steps is, again, we need to continue integrating that public input and present these recommendations in a more formal manner to the governing board. This isn't an action item today, it's more of an update. But the timing is such that we're still working very hard to pull all this together. And then again, September, that statewide strategy comes before CARD. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Hello, hi, sorry, Hilda Solis here, how are you?
Good, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I wanted to ask, you've already had several hearings, 8 of them in the community. Can we get a listing of what the attendance was? I'm curious in terms of Southgate, obviously, and Commerce, those areas.
We could provide
Can anyone respond?
Yeah, we could provide a full list. Off the top of my head, Commerce was about
35 to 40.
35 to 40?
Oh, no, Commerce was bigger.
Commerce was
That
100,
was Southgate. Commerce was
120.
100 or so.
Commerce was about 100, and then on Wednesday, in Southgate was about 35.
Okay, very good. Moving forward, though, I think we could really use a lot of help in terms of really further outreach. I would like to know what sources you use for outreach, because we know there are several groups that we've been working with out in these areas that probably, we could try to work to help amplify as we move forward. And I had a question regarding the East Los Angeles and Boyle Heights. I wondered if we are locked into neighborhoods, because adjoining Boyle Heights is Chinatown and Highland Park, and I know that they have very high levels of PM 2.5. In fact, I just heard it on the news this morning again. And Chinatown, as you know, is kind of not in the central city of Los Angeles, but there are many rail yards and freeways. And I would just want to ask what methodology was used, and if there are ways of expanding the neighborhood, because they may be in the same zip code, and they are low-income areas.
So we're taking all input, including that input, and we can go back and look and see how those communities,
Okay.
look in terms of the metrics we've developed. And again, as we go to the communities and do that outreach, we may get that feedback that they wanted to bring some surrounding neighborhoods in, and I think we're open to all those approaches.
Okay, because there wasn't any outreach as far as I can tell, unless you can share with me something I don't know, but we'd like to be helpful in that way.
Okay, and then to your first question of, in doing the outreach we did for these community meetings, we did have some contracts with some local community groups to help get the word out and help bring people to the meetings. So I think we can, as we focus more in on the communities that were going to be part of the program, we'll definitely be expanding that and working with those local groups.
And we'll be happy.
And if you could share, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead,
We'll be happy to
Dwayne,
work
I'm
with your
sorry.
office in assisting us with that outreach.
Yeah, good. And I'm happy to see that you do have San Gabriel Valley, but in one of your charts, but that's farther down in 6-year period. And I'm wondering why maybe you didn't take a look at the unincorporated areas of San Gabriel Valley and Bassett, Valinda, even up the 605 freeway. You have you have a number of impacted cities close to freeways there, and a lot of heavy traffic, truck traffic.
Yeah. So we considered all areas. We looked at all census tracts, whether they're incorporated or unincorporated or whatever city or county they were in. But we're happy to take another look at that area based on your comment and see how they rank and see if there's any anything we can do based on that input.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
I answered my own question. This will go to the, to our board on July 7th.
Yes. So it'll be more of a draft formal report that gets more into the details of a lot of these criteria we developed are pretty detailed and have a lot of GIS. We have to put that all. We have to make the case to CARB that our recommendations are based on a systematic approach, and so we have to put that all in our report.
But as I understand it,
Dr. Fine, I have a question for you.
our position will be that we're providing a recommendation to our board, and then the board will either approve or amend as it deems appropriate to the California Air Resources Board. And in September, there is when the California Air Resources Board makes a decision on ultimately what's selected.
I have a quick question for you, Dr. Fine. As we're looking at the list for the sort of the next years, the 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 years, is there more detail we could get as far as where these all rank and what would be the next 5 or the next 5 after that? Just so I have a better idea, talking back to my constituency, especially in the Corona, Temescal Valley area in Indio and Riverside, I just want to make sure I'm not telling them, oh, maybe next year when it's really, 5 or 6 years for them.
Yeah, so what we're planning on doing, and timing is really tight, is each one of these 55 communities that we've identified is actually have, at least in an appendix to this report, like a one-page kind of community profile that talks about the scoring and the sources and all the considerations that went into that. We're really trying to get that done by the board meeting in July, but it may have to be some technical information we add on. But I think by the time we submit this to CARB, we expect to have that full accounting. When we get to the board in July, we may not have all that done, but we will have a draft report with the conclusions. But some of this technical info may have to trail just based on the fact we're still taking input and we only have a couple weeks to pull it all together. But the board can let us know what they think about that. And
You might want to add that we're focusing on the highest ranking ones.
Yeah, we'll have those for the highest ranking ones, but some of the lower ones, it's going to take a little more time to put it together. We think we could do it by July 31st, but maybe not by July 7th.
Sure, I think that'd be good for us to know, for instance, if we decide, recognizing we can only probably get 4 or 5, maybe we still want to send them 6 or 7 if a couple of them rank really high, with the technical details to say, hey, these rank really high and we're not sure what other ones what other communities you're looking at, but these might still be the highest ranking ones across the state. So it'd be good to have that technical detail definitely for those higher ranking ones. Thank you.
So Mayor, one of the challenges that I have is part of the CARB consultation group members is making sure that we manage expectations. And you mentioned 4 to 5 communities. We're saying 3 to 4 communities. And 4 communities is going to be a stretch for our staff to handle that. So I just want to be
Okay.
cautious so we don't overpromise.
Mr. Chairman,
Understood.
I do have a question about the
Sure.
Coachella Valley Air Basin. We talked about that up front, but then where does it end up here on this?
So it's, we're looking at Eastern Coachella, which has the right profile for AB 617 community, although it doesn't come up on the metrics necessarily because there's different issues. They deal with PM10 issues and agricultural issues and things like that. So, but we recognize that there's other factors out there that would rank them high. So we're looking at, maybe a subsequent year, year 2 or 3, where we can bring them in depending on resources. But there is work being done out there. Luis Almeida with CCV, one of those community air grants to expand some of his monitoring up into the northern part of the Salton Sea area.
And we provide technical assistance.
And we've been providing technical assistance, and we'll be partnering with him. So there'll be some groundwork being laid out there, even if they're not named as the first year.
Thank you.
Very good. Any public comments on this item? Any other board member comments, questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Fine. We'll move on to the summary of the 2017 annual report, AB 2588. Jillian Wong.
Yes. Morning, Mayor Benoit, committee members. My name is Jillian Wong. I'm a planning and rules manager, and I'm here to give you our annual update on the activities of AB 2588 and our other toxic programs here at the district. Also to provide you with some updates to guidance documents that accompany the AB 2588 program. So a very quick introduction. The guidance documents that we're talking about are our facility prioritization procedure, supplemental guidelines, and also guidelines for participating in the voluntary risk reduction program. So on the next slide, you'll see this is a pathway of what facilities can expect when they're going through the traditional AB 2588 process. They submit their quadrennial emissions inventory, which is an inventory of about 177 toxic air contaminants. We then take that emissions inventory and prioritize the facilities. Based on the priority scores, we then invite the high priority facilities to prepare either the air toxics inventory report, or if they qualify, to participate in the voluntary risk reduction program. After the ATIR is reviewed, if their risks might still be high, above 10 in a million, we then ask for a health risk assessment. After the HRA is approved, if their risks continue to be above 10, we then go to public notification. If it's above 25, then we ask for risk reduction. So in Rule 1402, so what you saw was that traditional approach. In 2016, we amended Rule 1402 to also include that voluntary risk reduction program and the potentially high-risk level facilities. What that does is give us different pathways for facilities to follow in terms of compliance with Rule 1402. So in 2017, we had quadrennial emissions reported by about 150 facilities, of which we did audits on about 40 of them. And then from there, what we noticed was there were 20 that met the high risk level or a high priority score. Therefore, they were notified that they would have to either prepare an air toxics inventory report or to participate in the VRRP if they qualified. And this shows you a breakdown of the 20 facilities where they ended up. For 4 facilities, we received emissions information that revised their priority score and dropped them below 10, so they were done with 2588. We had 6 facilities that elected to participate in the voluntary risk reduction program, and then the rest of the facilities continued on in the traditional program. In addition, there was that one potentially high-risk level facility that was designated in 2017, and that is LUCO. So here is a list of all documents that were actually reviewed in 2017. So in addition to the facilities that were notified to join the 2588 program in 2017, we were still working on documents from facilities that might have been notified the year before. So this gives you a breakdown of the workload and the level of effort that this team has been working on. There's a slight typo. Instead of 79 documents, it's really 76 documents across 35 facilities. You see the 4 facilities where we reviewed their emissions. The scores went under 10, and so they were done with Rule 1402. We audited the 40 quadrennial reports. We did, actually it's 14 air toxic inventory reviews, 3 HRAs, and 5 RRPs. In the voluntary risk reduction plans, there were 10, and the reason that's listed here is one voluntary risk reduction plan in terms of a level of effort is really the equivalent of an ATIR, an HRA, and an RRP. It just gives compressed timelines in terms of compliance and getting those reductions. And then there are 3 currently designated potentially high-risk level facilities, and that's the level of effort that we put in for those facilities in 2017. So in addition to what we did for 2588, here are some other key activities in 2017. Toxics rulemakings adopted 1430 and 1466, and then amended 1401, 1420, and 1466. We also continued special monitoring in Paramount and began the monitoring efforts in COMPTON. And we participated in doing a review of the 2014 emissions data that went into the National Air Toxics Assessment. And that was a review of about 70 facilities that were flagged by EPA as being high-risk contributors. So we would, go through and look at the emissions to make sure that what was reported in the NEI is consistent with what we have in our records. So here are the guidance documents. As you saw, the voluntary risk reduction program and also our guidelines, with the changes we made in 2016, as we have been receiving information from facilities, we have noticed that perhaps our guidelines haven't been specific enough as to the expectation of what we expect to see in terms of documentation to allow the program to move smoothly. So we're updating these guidelines just to be more clear on our level of expectation, and so facilities know what to provide to us. And that will help speed along our review. We're also updating the prioritization procedure with the most recent net data, and we're adjusting the calculation of the acute cancer score. So finally, here are some projected 2018 activities for toxics work here. We expect 82 core facilities to be reporting their quadrennial emissions and probably having to audit slightly more than half of them. We're working on developing proposed rules and amendments to current rules. We also are tracking any kind of potential additions or revisions to health values by OEHHA. As part of our 1402 revisions, we had said that we would bring these along with the 2588 report to let the board know if we were changing any of our health values within 2588. And then we're going to continue working with CARB staff on the development of the HRA guidelines for gasoline dispensing stations, which is an industry-wide category within AB 2588. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Any board member questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so I'm wondering how we decide which 50 facilities we inventory.
So what we do is when we get the quadrennial emissions, we then take those emissions through our prioritization procedures, and then we rank sort them. So depending on their priority score, we start with the highest priority scores, and then we keep going down till we hit 10. So that's how it's a rank sort, so that we hit the most, the highest emitters first.
So when you do the emissions inventory, you inventory, what do you inventory? Everything in the basin, or you can't possibly do that, can you?
Right, for the facility, it would be an emissions inventory of their permitted sources, and there are some diesel, equipment that does make it into the 2588 inventory. But yeah, there is a list of, the station. It's typically the stationary sources, no mobile sources included.
That's through the evaluation.
Correct, and that's done through the
Through the
AER.
annual emissions reporting, that's where we start. And then we narrow it down to, say, these 50 look like we need to take a closer look. And then we go from there. Okay, thank you.
We also pull people in for various reasons, like if staff is out in the field and they see something unusual, or permitting for engineers if something's going on with facilities. So there are other reasons that things can also be brought up a little bit higher into the queue.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any other board member questions? Public comment? All right. With that, we have our written reports that are attached. Any questions on any of those? Do our board members have any other business they wish to bring forward? Any general public comment? Oh, Sean?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see me. I can see all of you, but I hadn't had any questions, but I'm sitting here politely. I just didn't want anyone to not realize I'd been here, but maybe you can see me. I just can't tell if you are able.
We did see you. Thank you for joining us earlier. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude the meeting. Our next meeting will be July 20th. And everyone have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.